Good evening, good evening. It's 19 minutes going up to 7 o'clock. We're now inside the nation's business, and I'm Cliff Hughes.
And I'm Ricardo Brooks.
We're going to turn to an interview done by the Minister of Tourism, Ed Bartlett, on the BBC's HARDtalk with host Stephen Sackur. Mr. Bartlett told the interviewer that Jamaica's success in tourism reflects the strides that have been made in other sectors of the economy. Sakur questioned Bartlett about whether Jamaica's dependence on tourism to boost its gross domestic product was healthy.
Do you think it is healthy for Jamaica to be an economy that right now is so heavily dependent on tourism?
Tourism's role in economic development and economic building is very pervasive and sometimes misunderstood, because tourism is not a single economic activity. It's a confluence of many economic parts, all of which have an economic outcome of its own. So that tourism doesn't happen unless agriculture is flourishing and doing well. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen unless manufacturing is flourishing and doing well. It doesn't happen unless energy supplies are available, and medical supplies are available, and a range of services. It doesn't happen unless entertainment is available, attractions are available. So I could go on and on.
I get your point. I mean, clearly it is a part of a much bigger economic picture,
it's
and there are
ecosystem.
Sort of interlinks within that economy. I get that. But fundamentally, right now, pretty much 1/3 of economic activity in your country is linked to tourism. And we saw during COVID how vulnerable that can leave Jamaica if things go wrong.
Right. But that vulnerability is balanced by resilience that tourism has, which is the most resilient of all industry. It bounces back faster and it enables economic recovery at a faster rate. So that within a year and a half of COVID, Jamaica's economy was back on track. In fact, we had 11 consecutive quarters of economic growth, unprecedented in our history, because tourism grew and grew exponentially. In the period, we moved from 0 arrivals in 3 years to 4.3 million arrivals and earning 4.6 billion US dollars.
I mean, the numbers are impressive, but at some point you're going to have to rein in your ambition. I saw somewhere you said you want to see 6 million visitors a year. I mean,
Prime Minister actually said 8.
8?
Yes.
But your population is only, what, 2.8 million?
Well,
this sounds like you are putting a strain on the resources, the infrastructure of your country that, frankly, it may not be able to bear.
Excellent point, in fact, because that's what defines over-tourism in the final analysis.
But you must be aware that in the west of your country, Negril and some other tourist communities close by, there have been water shortages. People have had to bring in privatized water at vast expense. There are people in their hotel rooms saying they couldn't get a shower, they couldn't get drinking water, it was in short supply.
So here's the challenge. The challenge is to build the carrying capacity, to enable us to plan appropriately and to accrete your infrastructure capacity to enable this increase in arrivals. So the decision to have 8 million is not lightly taken, and it has to be against the background of a whole series of development and infrastructure improvement, i.e. building carrying capacity over time to enable 8 million.
And at the same time as you say that the government is absolutely across that need to build in resilience, you also know that there are grave concerns in Jamaica about the long-term impacts of climate change.
Indeed.
And extreme weather events, which,
Indeed,
as we saw this last summer with Hurricane Beryl, are putting another and very different massive strain on your infrastructure and resources.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's why we move very quickly to establish institutional mechanisms to build capacity to, one, forecast disruptions, observatories that allow us to look down the road to see what's happening. Secondly, to create opportunities for mitigation against these disruptions. Thirdly, to build capacity to manage the disruptions when they come. And then to recover quickly and fifthly to thrive.
See, I just
so
wonder,
so
again,
it's against that background, that I established the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center.
Listen, I get it. I get your ambition, but I also wonder about that word hubris. You know, you're talking about very quickly getting to 8 million visitors a year. We know that extreme weather events are becoming more common, not least in the Caribbean. And then I look at what happened this summer when Hurricane Beryl hit, and immediately, according to UNICEF, 160,000 Jamaicans, including almost 40,000 children, were in dire need of humanitarian assistance. I mean, it just seems there's something going on here.
No, we recovered so fast from the Beryl impact. Indeed, Beryl didn't hit Jamaica directly. What happened is that Beryl passed close to the southern side of Jamaica, and the outer bands of Beryl caused some difficulty for us. But the northern side of Jamaica was essentially untouched.
Sure,
for example,
the southwest. I guess I'm just getting to this point. If one looks forward, do you believe when it comes to climate change, let's leave aside the strain of tourism, but do you believe when it comes to climate change that Jamaica is getting enough long-term investment and assistance from the rich world, as has been promised at various climate summits and conferences? Because I'm looking at the figures, and thus far, given the nature, the scale of the pledges, countries like Jamaica are actually getting very, very little in terms of real, tangible assistance.
That I agree 100% with you on that. And that is perhaps the challenge of island states such as Jamaica that are, in fact, highly vulnerable and weakly resourced. So there has to be a greater ambition among the multilaterals to recognize the particular vulnerability of island states in this regard and to provide greater support, and also to provide support at a level that enables them to access it. Because that's part of the big problem, that the protocols are so onerous that small countries like Jamaica have a difficulty in accessing it to the extent that we require. So that really has to be the big argument that must occupy our discourse.
And that's going to be a huge challenge, to get your voice heard and to get tangible help.
The Tourism Minister, Ed Bartlett, there on the BBC's Hard Talk, being grilled on sort of an age-old question, the sustainability and resilience of tourism. Obviously, Ed Bartlett is a champion for that sector, that industry. The minister was also questioned about the crime situation in the country, and he says the country has had a steady reduction in major crimes over the last 12 months.
But let's talk now about a different challenge facing you as Tourism Minister, but facing your government more generally, and that is the massive damaging impact of endemic violent crime inside Jamaica. It damages people inside your country. It tarnishes your reputation far beyond your own country. It's extremely damaging for the tourism sector. What are you going to do about it?
Well, firstly, we recognize it as a challenge, and it's a challenge that is not peculiar to Jamaica, but that gives us no comfort.
I'll tell you what's peculiar
that absolutely
to Jamaica,
gives
the
us no
scale
comfort.
of the problem. If you look at the homicide rate in Jamaica, it outstrips any other country with a significant population in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. Your murder rate is far higher than Honduras, for example, which used to be the murder capital of the world, far higher than Ecuador or El Salvador. And if one looks across the world at countries like South Africa, which have a huge violent crime problem, you're far higher in terms of homicide rate than
Stephen,
South Africa.
Here's the story. The work has been done and is being done. Jamaica is realizing reduction in every element of violent crime over the last 12 months in particular. We're seeing tangible work. Investment has been put into building capacity for social development, for dealing with recidivism, to deal with whole building of capacity for people to have better understanding and relationships. So all of that is happening. Then hard laws are being put in place to deal with it. So it's not just a question of punitive action. It is also about social development. Through the ZOSO that we have developed, these are zones of economic support for communities that are, pressured, socially deprived.
You say you're,
and it is making a huge difference.
I just want to make. There's space here for a few questions. Do you know how many separate armed criminal gangs are believed to be at work in Jamaica right now?
Well, I don't have a figure on that, but what I'm saying is that the level of dismantling of those gangs have been phenomenal.
Well, I mean, for your information,
no
a respected 2021 study, admittedly that's 3 years old, but there's no reason to believe it's changed very much, found there were, quote, 379 separate organised criminal gangs in Jamaica with a population of fewer than 3 million.
But you know, it is very interesting that that number could be there, but look at how they have been managed over time. And the truth of the matter is that we have been dismantling, and the Ministry of National Security has had enormous record over the last number of years in dismantling them. And Jamaica's position has not caused, for example, the growth in our tourism. Let's take, for example, which is a very sensitive industry, has not caused a growth reduction. Indeed, we have grown exponentially over the period.
Well, hang on, if that's true,
and critically,
because you're making the case, you're saying, you know what, we're on top of it, things are getting better. If that is all true, why has the US government, for example, still got a travel advisory out which suggests that all those considering travelling to Jamaica should, quote unquote, reconsider travel due to crime? And if you do go, it says, exercise increased caution. Some areas have increased risk. It says violent crime occurs throughout the country. Sexual assaults occur frequently, including in all-inclusive resorts. That's the official US government advice.
That narrative is the narrative of a few months ago. You should look at the most recent. You should look at the most recent
from the US government.
The fact is, however, that this is a Category 3, which we have had since COVID, and notwithstanding that, we have seen exponential growth. Investment in Jamaica has been phenomenal. FDI has grown phenomenally, and we have had 11 consecutive quarters of economic growth. Now, that is not to say
but do you think the US government, the UK government, whose travel advisories still advise enormous caution if travelling to Jamaica, and at least in the Americans' case, argue that you should reconsider your travel plans, do you think that they are just plain wrong? And if you do, what are you doing about it?
Absolutely, we're not saying you're wrong. What we're saying is that what has been indicated there is not altogether related to activities that are happening, because travel advisories are a composite of many things, including geopolitical considerations. And we don't ignore that. And we take that, and the good news, in fact, if there's any, is that the arrivals out of the US, for example, has almost doubled in the last 8 years.
Interesting exchanges there between Stephen Sackur, the BBC's Hard Talk, with the Tourism Minister, Ed Bartlett, Ricardo. The issue, for example, of the number of gangs operating in Jamaica, a very troubling one. I often give the example of the time when Owen Ellington was the Commissioner of Police. That was more than 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah.
And he made it clear that the focus for his divisional commanders was to reduce gangs.
To dismantle them.
To dismantle. And it never happened. But last week, Anthony McLaughlin from CTAC told us that we had dismantled the number of gangs from just over 300 to about half of that.
Yeah, about 150, 160 is my recollection. And DCP Fitzbailey, before he left, had also made the point at various briefings at Jamaica House. So they have made progress. And as I was saying to you, Cliff, there's something about this program, BBC HARDtalk, and I've watched Caribbean leaders on this program over time. There's something about it that sort of rubs me the wrong way. Sackur is undoubtedly a very good journalist, but I find the way he probes Caribbean regional leaders who appear on the program is sometimes without the context of the fact that the society he lives in and the institutions he defends there, in large part, are to be blamed for some of the social problems that still plague this part of the world.
And economic as well.
Absolutely. And I would appreciate if more of that context is brought to bear in his interviews. But I think Bartlett is batting well.
Yeah. And to the point you make, though, is the attitude. Yeah. The approach is one of lecturing.
Yes. Absolutely.
Without putting into the lecture what you're taught at university. Yeah, the context, the background, very, very important.
Yeah.
There was an interview I saw with him and the president of Ghana.
Yes.
Yes, about Ghana's recent massive oil discoveries.
Right. And climate change. And Dr. Ali put him in his place properly.
Irfan Ali just said no.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, in the meantime, Sackur asked Bartlett if Jamaica would ever consider a draconian crackdown on crime like they have done in El Salvador.
Talking about the law and talking about lawlessness, I think it's interesting to think about Jamaica in the wider context of your region. I mean, interesting things are happening in other countries. I'm thinking now of Central America, which is not so very far away, where various countries have tried to address violent crime, gangs and cartels, and a prominent country doing its utmost is El Salvador. Now there, the president has passed draconian new laws, which have seen him lock up, and I think this is right from my latest reading, up to 1% of the entire population. That is a vast number of young males have been locked up because of their involvement in criminal gangs and violent crime. Homicides, as a result of this crackdown, have gone down from 53 per 100,000, still not quite as high as you in Jamaica, just as 2.4, i.e. a draconian crackdown works. Would Jamaica consider it?
We're a democracy. And we have to respond.
I mean, President Bukele in El Salvador, yes, he was elected too.
But we are a democracy from your Westminster system. And we rule essentially by the laws, as you know. And we think that managing our crime situation has to be a mix of many factors. Strong laws, strong action by way of policing, but strong social interventions as well. And that's a mix that Jamaica is using to deal with the crime.
But that Jamaica is not going to engage in. Is that what you're saying?
Draconian lockdowns of that type would not go well with the kind of democracy that we have.
Do you think you get enough help from the end user countries where the cocaine that passes through Jamaica is consumed? I'm thinking of the United States and Europe. Do you think you get enough help from them when it comes to cracking down on drug use, consumption? And do you think you get enough help, particularly from the United States, when it comes to stopping the flow of guns, weapons into your country?
That's the problem. The real problem is stopping the flow of guns and weapons into the country. And so that there is need for much more ambition in this area, far more support to enable a significant cessation of flows into our space.
That's it. That's all we have time for. Yeah, we have a few more minutes. That's Stephen Sackur of BBC HARDtalk. He also asked Minister Bartlett about Jamaica's attitude towards homosexuality. Mr. Bartlett responded by saying that Jamaicans are hospitable people.
Just one other point. We've discussed violent crime. You say that the trends are in a positive direction. There's one other thing which is on the minds of some potential visitors to Jamaica, and that is Jamaican attitudes to homosexuality, in particular male gay sex. Now, under your law, as I understand it, that can be penalised. That is, gay sex between men can be penalised by prison terms up to 10 years, including hard labour. And the UK official advice to travellers says, and I'm quoting, "The attitude of many Jamaicans towards same-sex relationships is hostile." Your tourism minister, would you like to see Jamaica change its laws and change its attitude toward homosexuality?
Well, I tell you, once you go, you know. And I think that's statement which is factual for all visitors who come to Jamaica, including UK visitors.
Once you go, you know. What do you mean?
Once you go, you know how hospitable, how kind, and how responsive the Jamaicans are to all visitors of whatever class, race, creed, lifestyle, or orientation. And there's no question about that.
If you're a gay man who chooses to holiday in Jamaica with your partner, you can, as I understand the law, be at risk of being locked up.
Well, you'll be surprised if you ever come to see And perhaps you should.
Well, I'd love to come to Jamaica.
Absolutely.
I just want to be clear. Are you saying these laws, though they're on the statute book, mean nothing? Is that what you're saying?
No. We're not saying that at all. But you know that laws are stated in relation to a number of factors. And indeed, laws have also timelines that go beyond what is current. And current situations sometimes reflect not necessarily what legal positions are.
And Bartlett should point out to him, 2 gay men holding hands in Jamaica will not be acceptable in certain spaces, but that is not illegal in Jamaica. What is illegal in Jamaica is anal sex.
And listeners would remember that Sakur was the one who posed that now infamous question to former Prime Minister Bruce Golding.
Yes.
Which elicited that answer, not in my cabinet. And that would have been probably, 14 years ago?
2008 or 9.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear him bringing the question up again. And as I saw a YouTuber saying, yes, it was Britain who gave us that law.
Yes.
So again, there's the sort of lecturing without the context. Mm-hmm. But I understand the minister to be saying that tourists, certainly gay tourists, are not harassed or bothered in Jamaica. Minister Bartlett was also asked about Jamaica's position on stepping away from the British Monarch. He says there's no doubt about it.
Let me ask you about a different set of questions which are facing Jamaica, because as I said at the very beginning, you pride yourselves on being an influential country across the Caribbean, and one of the big questions facing you and some other Caribbean nations is whether you want to, in the end, cut your ties with the British monarchy, stop recognizing the British monarch as your formal head of state. Jamaica said some time ago, the government said that it was going to put a proposal before the people of your country by 2025. Yes. Now it seems that's not going to happen. Why?
Well, the proposal is pretty much on track. I think one of the changes that you have to consider in all of this is one which brings people into the mainstream of discussions and discourses so that there's full consensus in every step of the way. And that process is ongoing in Jamaica now. And yes, we will repatriate our sovereignty. There's no question about that. And I think that's the way that all countries want to go.
You say there's no question about it, but I'm looking at what you said in 2022 when William and Kate visited Jamaica. You said then the time has come to address this issue of repatriating our sovereignty. We need to do it now with grace and ease and no rancor. Well,
absolutely.
Yeah, you said that.
And that remains a position.
Well, yeah, but nothing's actually it's not being
happening.
Delivered, is it?
No, it is very much being delivered.
If I may, because people won't know this, you're now locked in a dispute with the opposition party in Jamaica because the opposition says they will not support going to a referendum and support the idea of cutting ties with the monarchy unless at the very same time your government agrees that it's not just about the monarchy but also a change so that the new final court of arbitration for Jamaicans is no longer the Privy Council, as it's always been under the current system, but becomes the Caribbean Court of Justice. Your government is refusing to accept that.
Yeah, but that's the opposition's position. We're government. And we're government because we are managing the will of the people. And so the position that the government takes on the matter is in consonance with the will of the people. So the opposition may have a position, and the day when the people give them the mandate, then of course. But what it is now is that we're moving ahead to repatriate our sovereignty. The process is ongoing. We have a minister who is responsible for piloting the process through the parliament and also with multiple consultations across the country. Town hall meetings are happening as we speak in various parts of the country where we're getting feedback from people as to what the new constitution amendment should be.
But I guess the opposition has one advantage, and that is logic, because the opposition is saying it has to be about full, quote-unquote, full decolonization. That is, not just cutting ties with the monarchy, but cutting ties with the Privy Council.
But decolonization doesn't mean that you lose everything that may be beneficial to you. To repatriate your sovereignty means that you now have responsibility for your own management, and you choose what you need to retain and what you should not. And so the right of Jamaicans to retain what they feel is good for them must never be denied.
Do you think it is a right of Jamaicans to also get financial compensation from the UK government for the history of enslavement which your people suffered from?
I think it is a discussion that must continue, because there is a growing consensus among peoples of the world that the wrongs, the heinous wrongs of history need to be made right. And I think reparation is a discussion along that line.
But are you talking about clear financial compensation? Because the UK Foreign Secretary at the recent Commonwealth Summit in Samoa said that it is not, quote, about the transfer of cash. I just wonder whether you as a government minister in Jamaica think very clearly it is about the transfer of cash.
Well, I don't personally, and this is not a government position, personally, I don't think it is necessarily about transfer of cash. I think it is a lot more about a recognition that a wrong has been done and a determination to right that wrong. Now, the mechanisms for righting that wrong is still for discussion, whether it is about cash transfers or it is about creating institutional support mechanism to build technical support for individuals, educational development, or other social development. But what has to be done is some reparatory activity.
A cynic might say that the British government, by saying it wants to continue the discussion, but saying that, you know, there's no prospect of cash being transferred, it wants to kick the whole issue into the long grass. Do you believe, from the perspective of Jamaica, the perspective of the Caribbean, that it can be kicked into the long grass and essentially forgotten?
Well, I think that it is impatient of time, and attempting to kick in the long grass will not wear well with a growing consciousness in the world, not just here in the UK, because the consciousness is strong in the UK too. There are far more conciliatory comments that are coming from quarters that were totally unexpected, because I think the clash of values, what I call the intergenerational clash of values, have now come to roost. We are recognizing that indeed the values of the past caused a wrong that has scarred humanity, and that wrong must be made right, and the time for it is now.
Tourism Minister Ed Bartlett, he was speaking on BBC's HARDtalk with Stephen Sackur.